So the next panel is actually an interesting one because we have a lot of conversations at Sapphire with many of you CXOs who are coming to the Valley or have virtual sessions with us where everyone wants to tap into innovation and understand what's the latest and greatest in the Valley and how do I incorporate that innovation into my company. And everyone is trying to stay up to speed, but it's really difficult. There are a lot of companies out there, a lot of money that has been funding a lot of companies, and sometimes you need some sort of a blueprint or a roadmap that would allow you to understand how innovation could be incorporated into your organization. And obviously, the ability of the organization to digest innovation is something that is ever-changing as well. So to talk about that and how to effectively build an innovation machine, the next panel is going to be moderated by Max Wessel, and Max is the GM of SAP.io, SAP.io. It's an SAP initiative to cultivate innovation inside and outside of the organization. So, Max?
Rami? So we have 30 minutes to talk about a subject near and dear to many of our hearts. But the most important folks are coming to join me. We've got a great panel. Clark Golestani, who's the CIO of Merck. We have Samir Jain, the CIO of Barclays, and Shakti Johar, Pepsi's SVP of Global HR and Shared Services.
Ooh. Oh. This one started really well.
Yeah, it's all right. So, working with startups is a hot topic, right? Everybody sees, we've been to conferences like these. You probably send lots of folks to things like Techstars, et cetera, TechCrunch, Disrupt, et cetera. Can you just give a little bit of context for your roles, who you are, and a little bit of how you interact with startups and the capacity of that job?
Sure. So Clark Golestani with Merck, and for those that don't know, we're a biopharmaceutical with a human health business and an animal health business that I affectionately call our edibles and petables business. And we also have a health solutions and services group that's really an emerging business. So at Merck, I wear three hats. I have the division that's emerging businesses that we really have health tech as an underpinning, a venture fund and growth equity fund for the company, and then the global IT organization that operates and does everything with technology across all the divisions.
Hi, Samir Jain. Thanks a bunch for having me here. I'm the CTO for Barclays Bank. It's a British bank that's been around for 350 years. And we like to think of ourselves as a technology company with a balance sheet and regulators. I've taken on a new role. The CTO role is new. I took it on in April. Prior to that, I was the CIO of the investment bank. So I've grown up on the trading side, on the investment banking side. And given some of the big technology decisions we've got to take across the firm, they've asked me to take this role as Chief Technology Officer, setting the technology strategy for Barclays Bank.
Hi, my name is Shakti Johar, and thank you for having me here. I'm one of the non-CIO guys sitting in the room today. And I was wondering, I said, what can I offer to the smart bunch of CIOs? My current role is Head of Global HR Operations and Shared Services for PepsiCo. PepsiCo is in the middle of massive transformation for the last number of years, and HR has taken the lead in it. I grew up in manufacturing. I'm an engineer by profession. I spent a lot of time in manufacturing, spent time in IT, finance, and now in HR. So I was brought into this role to digitize or digitally enable HR and transform HR. And I've been in this role for about 4 years, where, just for context, we have about 300,000 employees across 82 countries. And our goal was to have a global HR strategy, global HR enablement across the board. So that's sort of my current role. And I work a lot with folks like Rami and others to scout for new innovation that we can leverage in the space of HR.
So if new innovation is the goal, one of the things that we tend to see in the Valley is a lot of folks not quite knowing what the capabilities and advantages of working with startups tend to be. it seems like each of you in the capacity that you're in right now is driving that for your organization. When you talk about what you should expect to get from a partnership with a startup and what you shouldn't expect to receive, what are those key things, those key expectations? Shakti, do you want to start?
I can start off. I'll boil it down. It's really simple. When I look at startups, they're like the birthplace of proof of concept for us. So if you really look at all these startups, they bring a lot to the table. They can unlock a lot of great stuff that we can change what we do and how we do things. So we look at these startups from a point of a proof of concept, and then what they don't bring to the table is really being able to go enterprise, and this is where we can provide them the right support. So we bring them into PepsiCo based on our research and analysis, and help them go enterprise. So our goal is to stay ahead in terms of innovation and bring in as many as we can so that we can continue to innovate on top of this. So it's a plug and play model. It is not something we'll bring in and it'll be there forever. We bring startups in, we take them enterprise if necessary, and then we bring more of them. We are disrupting ourselves almost on a daily basis.
I think we use the word startup pretty casually, but actually there's a broad spectrum of companies all the way from early stage to Series A, Series B. In my experience, there are very few companies that have an enterprise grade product. And so companies like ours typically make the mistake of treating these startups as vendors, when they really need to be thought of as partners. And if you approach it thinking that there's a menu of capabilities that startups offer, but you get to influence their roadmap, you get to customize their product, not to kind of fit Barclays necessarily, but to fit an enterprise model. The relationship changes and it becomes much more productive. But to be able to do that, you need to have the stamina and the energy, because that co-creation of the product does take time and effort. And the other thing you've got to realize is these are small companies. If they're just dancing with you and it amounts to nothing, they're missing out on other opportunities of growth. So there's a real obligation that you have, because we're a big company, we're Barclays, they want a marquee brand. They will dance with us, but if we're not respectful of where they are and what they need, that could actually be bad for the whole ecosystem. So I think that's how we think about these companies. We take these relationships very seriously. We use Techstars and companies like that, or our venture capital clients, to help us really hone in on the companies that we should be involved with, and we hold people accountable for people that we assign to work with these startup companies.
So there's probably 3 points that I'd add. The first is I completely agree with what's been said. Startups are like little baby plants, and if you're not careful, you overwater them and kill them. So you have to really protect them and grow them. And I think in that sense, having a large enterprise is, I think, what a lot of startups actually need, so that they can understand what it'll eventually take to get to scale. And if you culture it right, you can really help drive them. The other aspect, I think, around startups is quite often, I don't know how many enterprises out there move really fast and agile and invent and innovate instantly. I know we don't. So one way of also using startups that we do is we see business challenges, and we'll go out and we'll find folks that are working in that field. The perfect example is blockchain, and how that can be applied to health. We understand what the problem is, how to solve it. So rather than try to do that internally, well, why not seek out a startup, actually work in partnership with them, and give them the business problem, help shape their thinking. And that also is an opportunity then to perhaps even invest or help bring them along and create optionality for the future for the company. So those, I think, are some really key areas and aspects that I'd build on what these guys have said.
So can I ask just a follow-up there? When you think about partnership, you think about co-development, you think about kind of helping somebody get to that enterprise-grade solution that you require. That feels like it's somewhat in opposition to the desire to maybe solve a number of distinct business challenges at once, right? How do you balance wanting to drive innovation across the organization and needing to focus on partnering with those potential vendors or partners that could solve the most critical challenges?
I know for us, it goes back to smothering. It's pretty easy to smother that startup. So I think the challenge that you're trying to solve needs to be pretty distinct, pretty clearly defined, and typically happens in one area of the business. Then the question becomes, how do you actually create the model by which you're able to do dozens of these and do that effectively to drive that innovation in and across every aspect of the business? I know at Merck, we've structured the organization on the IT side around the McKinsey model, which is a 3 horizons model. That way we can rapidly take innovations that are out there that we partner with, sometimes even build startups, bring it all the way back and try to get it to scale within several years so that you're able to really affect the organization. But it's a careful balance. You got to make sure you don't crush that little plant before it's had an opportunity to grow.
Across the globe, there's a ton of stuff happening. And the way we think about it is we want to be involved in the ecosystem in all the major centers we do business in. And each of these ecosystems is different. The New York ecosystem is specializing in something quite different than the London ecosystem, is very different than the Tel Aviv ecosystem, is very different than the Mumbai ecosystem. And so if you just cover it regionally, you're not going to be able to be coordinated globally, and you're going to look at competing things. So we do think you need to cover it globally, but you need to be very well coordinated internally. The way we do it is we've got an innovation function. And it's a function that not only runs our physical spaces that are embedded in the ecosystem, but in that function, we have innovation heads for each of our businesses. And their job is to make sure, just like you said, business challenges, we call them problem statements. Their job is to canvas the problem statements from their business and then to kind of farm it out to the different ecosystems to see where there's a match. Now, we have a monthly forum where we track all the different problem statements that we think are worthy of exploration through our innovation forums. You'll see banners throughout the bank encouraging people from the grassroots to submit problem statements. We've done so much as to build a tool where people can put a problem statement, and we give people virtual money that people can then can invest in each of these problem statements to see what floats to the top. And the one thing we found is that people that typically get involved in core traditional technology projects are few. There's a governance, there's stakeholders. But by using this kind of an approach, you're getting a different set of the user base that's actually more at the grassroots level, on the line, communicating upwards into what the challenges are. So managing the problem statements, knowing where in the world you should take those problem statements because you've got this global reach, all managed with a fantastic knowledge management system because there's a ton of stuff to kind of keep track of. Companies on the watch list, maybe not good enough right now, but we want to come back to them in 6 months. These are essential tools. And then having another platform where people can willingly contribute ideas, and we treat it like a marketplace to see what the bid offer is and what ideas are float to the top based on a voting that the colleagues do, works really well for us.
So I think very interesting comments. What we do, I'll focus on HR because that's where my focus is today. What we did, and there's a little bit of an advantage in such a large organization. It's really hard to think about global unless you have certain platforms in place. So I have a little bit of an advantage when we were going through our transformation journey. We got to a certain point, we have global platforms for almost everything in HR, and that allowed us to then use this innovation that's coming in from startups much more effectively. So it's a plug and play model, like I said earlier. We had started a program, we have a program called 90-90. 90 days of deployment and 90 days of ROI. So what we would do is we would look out all the problem statements that come out of the HR business, go look for innovation, even if the problem statement doesn't come out and we see something really innovative that can change how we do things. We bring them into the fold, we review that really carefully, and then shortlist a couple of candidates every 6 months, and we bring them in, we plug them in, and their job is really to do a deployment within 90 days and be able to show an ROI in 90 days. If you don't get that, that's the end of that relationship. Otherwise, we will partner with them and take them enterprise. And that model has worked really, really well for us. I haven't come across one startup that we selected that has actually failed that 90-90 test. So it's amazing, how these startup companies, whether A, B, or C, they're all really committed in making that change. And I think the support they have from the VC community and otherwise other investors is amazing. So you can see that when they're working with us. So that model has worked really well for us. It's something that we will continue at least for a while.
So Clark, I know you spend a lot of time out here in the Valley, and you manage a big evergreen fund as well for the company. So I'm sure you're plugged in all over. One of the things I hear, it sounds like the 90-90 model is incredible at driving change, also in part because it's tied to the LOB problem that emerges. As somebody who's serving as the feeler network in part for Merck, how do you make sure when you're identifying companies to work with, et cetera, there's the LOB follow through? How do you make sure the other sponsors in the organization actually take the great opportunities and run forward?
That's a great question, and I almost I'd separate it a little bit in the world of Merck, because there's one aspect which is how IT can leverage startups to really drive innovation, ultimately to really enhance the effectiveness of the business, and that's a little bit different than the Evergreen Venture Fund, where we're doing investment, sometimes market shaping and market building in a way that's adjacent and supportive of our core business. Mm-hmm. So on the IT side, when we look at how do we drive those startups, and we're out there feeling and sensing, what we're really doing is looking for folks that have different ways of, I think, accelerating what we're not doing internally. And the selection of those and the feelers for those, what I find is most of them will actually come to you. It's forums like this, where you get that exposure, you're able to look. And I also think that most organizations are going to look at startups that are a little bit further along than literally a pure startup, two folks with an idea, and have yet to actually prove out the technology or even create a proof of concept. So the IT side, where we really focus, is on those that proof of concept is there, they're beginning to scale, and having an enterprise client will help them really enhance their technology and broaden it, as well as global reach. Now, on the other side, when you are a venture fund, quite often getting in earlier, sometimes very early, can really be quite beneficial, especially if you're strategically enabling the core, getting in early if you have that opportunity. So there's a little bit of a different flavor between venture investing to actually build businesses versus what I call venture using to really use those startups to enhance the core business. And we have a little bit of a difference. Now, the engagement of the business partners on the venture side, we run it like a venture firm. And the senior partners are actually all of the senior business partners across the divisions that play a role in approving the investment. So we run it with a formal board. They actually weigh in on the decision. The pitches are done by the venture partners, probably not unlike the way that the venture fund here operates. That forces them then to really weigh in on, do they think the investment is a good one for the future of business, the optionality, which may or may not involve use of that technology actually for the core business. Versus on the IT side, what we do is we force business sponsorship. So there must be a business sponsor for that proof of concept. And they need to, I like the 90-90, we haven't been as formal as the 90-90, but in essence, we run that pilot to demonstrate that value, and the business partner has to really sign off and actively sponsor it. Without that, I don't think it works.
I know Barclays, you mentioned Samir has an interesting co-development process. When you think about sponsorship and making the right resources available, I mean, how does that engineering capacity then come in?
Let me explain to you how we've set up the platform. So we call it RISE. We think that you need to be immersed in the local ecosystem. We feel you've got to be really authentic in the ecosystem, and you risk reputational risk if you come in and out, because that ecosystem will start depending on you. So we have really good space in 7 of the big business centers where we do business. What do we do with that space? We rent that space out to early stage startups. So the people that are creating the vibe within the space we've occupied. We're always oversubscribed. We hold events at this physical space for the community so that people can come there to learn, people can come there to network, people can come there for help with other startups, because no startup can kind of just get it right all by itself. So this is the stuff that we contribute to the community. We also make sure there's a lot of Barclays traffic through this physical space. So we bring our clients there. We show our clients the kind of companies we're curating there. We have co-ideation sessions that we hold in the space. Some of us go down and work out there just because it's a totally different way of working. We have events for clients there. We have events for Barclays colleagues there. And every time we have an event, the local ecosystem, the startup ecosystem is always invited. And by creating a physical space, they know we're going to be there. In New York, we even have a booth where we do podcasts from. So there's a real commitment made to the ecosystem. There's a real giving to the ecosystem. And because of that, the dynamic and the energy of the ecosystem flows through Barclays. We also, through that same platform, run an accelerator program. So we've run 8 accelerator programs. We take between 10 and 15 companies through our accelerator program. The last one we did in New York, we had 550 companies worldwide that applied. We use Techstars to kind of help us sift through the companies. We run hackathons. In September of last year, we held the biggest fintech hackathon. We had 550, let's call them companies, with over 1,000 people that participated in the hackathon. And everything we do in there is with a view towards the problem statement or something that we need in our banking business. So whether it's the companies that we rent space to, whether it's the events that we host, whether it's the hackathons that we do, the accelerator companies that we pick, it's all geared towards our business. We're not in there trying to curate a business that isn't our core competency. The other thing we do is we use our venture capital clients very well. We do believe, as someone said earlier in one of the panels, you've got to follow the money. The venture capital clients that we have do this for a living. We are not going to outsmart them by going and doing our own research on these companies. So we spend a lot of time with our venture capital companies, looking at the portfolio companies, and then we hold open innovation events where we will give a problem statement to our venture capital companies. They will get the relevant portfolio companies to come and pitch to us for half an hour on giving the problem statement and the way the company's gonna thinking about the solution space. How does that work? So in fact, next week I'm back in the Valley because we're doing one of those weeks, and the two areas of problem statement we've given them is AI and APIs. Just with open banking and some of the regulation that's coming into our market, how should we be thinking about the kind of user experience, the developer experience, API technologies, etc. So we use the venture clients that we have as well as our Rise platform to really co-create solutions for banking with the startup community.
And this is kind of touches on a question on all of the points that each of you made. So it seems like with the Rise platform, you're somewhat earlier stage in kind of the companies that you would work with. When you define a set and, let's say, Shakti, this is for an HR solution, when you define what needs to be accomplished in that 90-day deployment, and you think about what an early stage company might bring, what are the SLAs or the requirements for working with such a startup that you might relax from a traditional enterprise vendor in order to get that new innovation in the door?
It's a tough question. I don't think we relax a whole lot of things. The companies have to come in and they have to be secure in terms of their platform and data and all of that stuff. I think what we do relax is a little bit of experimentation that we don't generally allow on our platforms. I remember we were in the middle of deployment of Employee Central with SAP and we are the largest deployed platform of SAP Employee Central today. And right in the middle of it, we started this 90/90 program, and off came the idea on working with SAP to open up their APIs to let the startups actually write their own APIs, so I don't have to do that work, and they can come in already working with the platform. And that idea was taken up with SAP. I remember Mike Edling, who was the last CEO, decided to put up an app store, and that's now become a big deal. But at the end of the day, you don't relax. I think you have to figure out a way to work with the startups so that they can be successful. You want to provide all the resources that they need. So we have typically teams in each of the areas that focus on the startups, making sure they're successful. So the only exception I would make is a little bit of experimentation, but by and large, we don't relax any of the rules of the game.
What are the most common pitfalls, right? It seems like there's lots of opportunity. There are lots of places to either work with early stage companies, solicit them, find venture capital firms to work with, but it's certainly not all roses, because I'm sure many folks in the room have had experiences working with either small companies that didn't deliver or spending a lot of time with maybe an executive sponsor or business unit leader that didn't quite know what they wanted. If you're providing one or two pieces of advice as to things to watch out for a CIO that's trying to be most effective in this, what would those things be? Clark?
So I think getting clear expectations is really important, especially around startups. You have to recognize that it could fail, and there's a good probability that it could fail. And if you don't go in with those clear expectations, especially with a sponsor, and view it more opportunistic rather than a hard dependency on success, I think you can really set yourself up for failure. And then I've also watched the pendulum swing then when all of a sudden experimentation becomes the dirty word and failure is the dirty word, and then all of a sudden it forces out that innovation. So I think expectations, a recognition that it could fail, and that if you do fail, really setting a tone that you should want to fail fast and learn from those failures. And I think if that cycle gets going, people then begin to accept the failure, they take greater risks, they fail faster, it doesn't cost a whole lot in investment, and you end up driving far greater innovation. I think that's probably the biggest key ingredient that we needed to get right as we went down the path.
Samir, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Clark said. The thing that we find challenging is getting your data in a place where startups can kind of work with it. We've got to obfuscate data. There's a lot of client-sensitive data. You've got to be really careful about that. Making sure that you've got an experimentation platform, DevNet or whatever it might be, with good quality data is the biggest thing you can give a startup, but it's the hardest thing to achieve. The second thing I would say is it's great to create a product in isolation. Wedging it into your company, into a company like ours, which has got a lot of technology already running, is really, really hard. So understanding what the integration patterns are going to be and making sure that you've already kind of thought about those before you started kind of co-creating the product, because you could co-create the product only to find you never use it because you hadn't thought about the integration. So I think there would be two pitfalls that we've suffered from that I would say you want to get right if you've got a model like ours.
I think these two gentlemen have made really good points because those are all very, very critical. What I've noticed is the larger companies actually tend to fail more than the startups from what we've seen so far. It depends on the initial due diligence, which is really important. Your problem statement, like Clark said, and your ability to integrate and take them enterprise, like you were saying in terms of integration. I think all of this due diligence needs to happen right up front. But if you don't do that, then you are bound to fail one way or another. So you have to think about this slightly differently. And then in certain cases, you have to make sure that you are ready. A lot of times startups are way ahead of you and you may not be ready. I'll give you a simple example. We picked up a startup called HireScore out of New York. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. HireScore is a little brain that looks at patterns of what we hire and what kind of people we're hiring. And then identifies the right individual for hundreds and thousands of applications that we get every day, reducing the recruiter time by about 60, 70%. Now, PepsiCo being an OFCCP compliant company have a big issue in making sure that when the OFCCP comes in for an audit, we're safe. And in order to do that, it's not that product, it is your job description that has to be in order in a way that you can pass the test. Because ultimately the system or the process or the brain is going to do, the AI is going to do what you tell it to do. So if you say, this is my job description, and if that's not buttoned up, you're bound to fail. So you have to make sure you're ready on your side before you bring in a technology that's going to make it better for you and give you more efficiency. So I think that due diligence at the beginning is very, very important.
Great. Well, I see Rami, so I know we're closing on time. It's the universal signal. If anybody has, I mean, maybe we have time for one or two questions.
All right, there we go. So I'm the founder and CEO at Inkling. I'm one of the Sapphire portfolio companies. And one of the challenges that we face as a startup, right, and you guys use the term startup to cover a pretty broad spectrum of different kinds of companies. So we're at tens of millions of dollars in revenue, which is more typical of the stage of company that a company like Sapphire invests in. The challenge that we face coming into a company at the scale that you gentlemen are working with is that typically us and companies like us innovate in the line of business. We're not innovating. Obviously, there are many technologies that innovate for IT around security and other infrastructure components, but we're typically innovating as an application for a line of business. And very often, those applications displace traditional core infrastructure that's run by IT. So we're showing up at the doorstep of the CMO, in our case, often the CHRO, or people in a line of business, and pitching them on a new way of doing business. And they get excited about it, but when they go back to IT, what happens is the IT guys, not you, but somebody on your team is saying to that line of business owner, oh, we already have one of those. Or you should use this other thing we already own. And that often slows down startups making their way into companies because the IT guys are defending turf that, you know, at their level they think is sort of job security. So how do you create a culture where the IT team looks at the disruption of the technologies they're running today and the migration of the center of power directly out into the line of business as good for innovation in the enterprise as opposed to bad for job security for the IT manager?
It's a great question. And it's funny, some IT colleagues define their careers based on the technology that they own, they support, and they drive. So I think in the IT organization, it's incumbent upon not only the CIOs, but their leadership to change the culture of the organization and treat IT more as a business. And if you really are running as a business and you want to survive for the long term, the first thing you start to do is think about how do you disrupt yourself. And that needs to permeate down all the way to the IT director or manager, that how do we disrupt ourselves and run the place as a business. I think as that happens, what ends up happening is the IT organization then begins to pedal as faster than the line of business. And they're actually bringing to the line of business different opportunities and options to really drive the organization better, faster, cheaper. I found that to work pretty successfully, especially when you reward that behavior and do it publicly over time. The culture of the organization can really begin to shift.
Well, we do it pretty simply. Every application, platform, or even product that we've procured or licensed either has an invest tag with it or a divest. So we're very black and white based on which platforms do we want to get out of. We might not get out of them for 2 years, 3 years, for whatever reason, but across the entire organization it's well known which products aren't going to be fit for purpose in line with the business strategy in the medium to long term. So we're very clinical about it and we're very upfront with people. The staff doesn't mean you're going to be out of a job. Doesn't mean that your role's going to get impacted if the platform you happen to work on is on the divest camp. But it's very clear that if there's a solution out there in the marketplace that kind of either fills a gap or takes one of the divest technologies out, we will go out and buy it and sponsor it. So that's another thing we do.
I think in our case, it's a little bit easier because we moved 80% of what we do in HR to the cloud. So IT really doesn't own the application. HR teams do. So my teams actually, in partnership with IT, make those decisions on the applications. And nobody's losing anything because everything is already in the cloud. So we are just adding more to that portfolio as we add folks. So everybody is interested in this. The other thing I think about all the time is no one function or individual can really bring everything that is out there to the table, because everybody gets out there, they listen to these pitches, they talk to their colleagues in the other companies, you learn a lot. So everybody brings things to the table, and it's looked at by one single team that is actually making a decision. So in our case, it's less of an issue, primarily because of where we are in our transformation journey from an HR perspective.
Great. Well, in the spirit of keeping us on track and making sure Rami doesn't physically come up here and drag me off the stage, I would say we should thank the panelists, and we will let this move on. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.